This
And
conference will now
yeah,
be recorded.
okay. Just to make sure we are all on the same page once again, to explain the workflow, I'll start from there, take questions, and then we can get started with the session today. Again, I have a repository in Azure. It's a Git-based repository. And in this repository, I have a branch called as a develop branch. And this develop branch has the code, has all the code out here as such. And I, as a developer, if I want to change this code from my local laptop, I, as a developer, I create something known as a feature branch, my own feature branch, and establish or go ahead and create something called as a pull request between my laptop and the develop branch of my repository. So this is how I do it. I establish a pull request out here. I go ahead and do a pull request. And once I do a pull request, this is going to go ahead and kick off something called as a build pipeline. And in the build pipeline, I do have steps like .NET Restore, .NET Build, .NET Test, .NET Publish, publish artifacts, and etc. This is going to give me the artifact out here. It's now going to go ahead and let's say give me the artifact. And as and when I get the artifact, this goes ahead and kicks off a release pipeline. Now I'm telling that this is a continuous deployment pipeline, which talks to the Azure portal and probably a web app inside the Azure portal over a service connection. So there is a service connection that is established between Azure DevOps, which is a software as a service, and portal.azure.com, which is another software as a service. So there are two things that are communicating with each other via a service connection route. So there is this particular service connection that's getting established, and my release pipeline is going ahead and doing the deployment out here as such. My release pipeline is doing the deployment on the Azure web app, and whenever it deploys, you can go ahead and let's say see the change out here as such. So you can see the change in the code, which is going to tell you it's version 1, 2, 3, whatever version it is, and so on and so forth out here as such. So this is the workflow that we were following. So anyone, any questions in this workflow? Anyone, any questions before I get started with this session today? Anyone, any questions, guys? And did you all try this out? Did you all try establishing a service connection? Did you all try triggering off your first release pipeline out here? Anyone, any challenges, any questions that I can take? Anything as such?
In this pipeline, if there is a failure, we can do we have a mechanism called rollback also here in this
When
scenario?
you say failure, very importantly, I would ask you, what is the point of failure? I mean, are you getting a failure during the build, or are you getting a failure during the release, or are you getting a failure after the release? According to which I can diagnose the issue right now. So can you tell me, when you say failure, what is the point of failure are you referring to?
Suppose after the in release phase, if there is a failure,
In release phase, if there is a failure, your code won't even go into let's say your web app. Your code will get stuck there. It won't even go. So your web app will be still running on the older code. The web app that you basically go ahead and deploy, or basically go ahead and deploy out here. Let's say you deployed a 0.0.0 version, and in the release pipeline, while deploying the 1.0.0 version, there is a failure. So that 1.0.0 version will not even go into, let's say, will not even go inside your web app, will not even go inside your development web app at all. So that's the first condition. Let's say you say that, okay, fine, I did a 1.0.0 deployment, and after deployment, I am now observing issues. Is there a rollback mechanism? Yes, there is a rollback mechanism out there. Very simple. That's the reason you have these release history. I have releases out here, and using this particular history, I'll be able to now tell, yes, this is the code commit that I did, and this code has only changed this particular document, so this might be a 000. I'll just simply take this particular release and redeploy it back again. Now this is a rollback for me. So if I am just redeploying the version 2 or the release 2, this is an upgrade. But from release 2, I'm coming down to release 1. I'm now deploying the release 1 out here. This is called now as a rollback, rolling your changes back to the older release. It's telling this might remove some work items or some commits. And that's exactly what I want to do, because I want to now restore my code. So it's very important where my pipeline is failing. Is it failing at the build? Then we'll have to address the issue in a different way. Failing at the release, then we'll have to understand why it has failed at the release. And if it failed at the release, your code will not even go in the first place. And if it's failing post the release, then yes, you can go for a rollback out here as such.
Okay, if in release phase, if there is a failure, nothing to do because it's not overwriting the existing code with the webapps.
Again, it depends also on where is it failing. Is it failing on the phase where it is trying to deploy, or is it failing on the phase after it deployed? Now, a couple of things out here, a couple of questions out here that we need to ask. And yes, if
Mhm.
it's failing at the phase where it's trying to deploy out, for example, let's go ahead and replicate such a kind of an issue. So I'll just go ahead and say edit the release. I'll say create. I'm doing the development release today. Again, 30.2. This is the latest artifact version that I do have. Here you can also select which artifact version that you need. For example, I need the 000 version. I'll say this is the artifact 29.1. I'll create this out, and now it's going ahead and deploying. And now let's see if it fails, and if it fails, at which point it will really fail, and why is it really failing out here as such. This is the let's say uh, troubleshooting that I need to implement. Very importantly, I need to ask myself where it is failing, and if I say it is failing at release, now I'll ask at which step of release is it failing, and depending upon that I will diagnose the issue accordingly. So for example, it's downloading the artifact right now, this is all good, and now it's going in and trying to do the deployment and it failed. So now at deployment itself it failed, which means that the code wouldn't have even gone in. So then I would say, okay, fine, I don't need to do a rollback, I need to address this particular issue, and then I need to go ahead and let's say troubleshoot it accordingly out here as such. Getting the point, Ramakrishna?
Yeah. So it's
Yes,
important
no
in
point.
which way it is
Mhm.
failing and how it is impacting
Exactly.
pipeline.
Yes, exactly. So firstly, yes, I mean, how it is impacting, even that's something that you as a DevOps engineer would consider. But very importantly, before we go into how, a very important question is that why is it failing? Where is it failing? If we can address those, then we will be able to, let's say, reduce the impacts out here as such.
Suppose during this release, like this CI/CD release, right,
Mm,
refreshing, or
okay.
is there a downtime for the user?
Yes, there is a downtime. There is a downtime because you are deploying the code, right? So there will be a downtime out here for the users, because while you're deploying the code, what in the background, what will happen is that your web apps will first be stopped, or your app service is first stopped. It deploys the code on that, and then goes ahead and let's say restarts your application out here as such. So there would be a downtime, very minute, but still there will be a downtime out here as such. So
If you
Ken, the
use the
question is that
deployment
mm,
slots also,
so
still the downtime will apply.
good point. If you use a deployment slot, still a downtime? No, there will not be a downtime then. But what you need to do is that you need to make sure to tweak your release pipelines to deploy the code into the slot. That's the reason you have a slot. So for example, if you see the deployment rate, just scroll down, it's telling what is the app service name. And do you see this option telling deploy to the slot of the app service environment? I can click on
Oh,
this. I can now give what is the resource group where my slot is setting in and what is the name of the slot. I can deploy it. And after deploying it, there is something called as a task out here. You don't have to do this manually. Something called as a task called app service manage. Do you see something called swap slots? I can now
mhm.
say what is the app service name, what is the source slot, what is let's say the destination slot that I need, and I can swap let's say the code without having a downtime out here as such. So I can go for two-step approach out here instead of a single step approach out here as such. This is something that I can do. This is something that we do. So I'll just remove this out for now. I just put it the way it is out here as such. Yes, so you
In
can
this
directly
current
deploy it on.
deployment,
Go ahead, please.
sorry, Kiran, you were saying something.
No, no, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so in this current deployment, like there will be downtime, right? So if you want to put some
Yes.
banner like service is down for 20 minutes or like that, is there a possibility
Mm-hmm.
to put banner on the web services application?
Definitely yes. Definitely yes. There is a possibility to put the banner, and that's where you can get in a traffic manager. So you can have a traffic manager which has two different endpoints. Endpoint one, I mean, on a priority routing methodology, endpoint one would be your development, let's say, application. Endpoint two will be a simple HTML page that is telling you that, okay, fine, sorry, we are down for the deployment and so on and so forth. And you can write a very simple PowerShell script out here telling that before you start the pipeline, first switch the endpoints so that whenever a user is going to that particular endpoint, they will be able to see the traffic man or they'll be able to see the banner. And after the deployment is done, you can switch it back. So you can implement a traffic manager out here and you can make sure to switch those endpoints. I'll also show that, not a problem at all. It's a very simple implementation. We'll also look at that out here as such.
Yeah, it will help us for
Mhm.
commerce.
Sure. Any more questions, guys? Anyone? Any more questions out here? Anyone? Any questions out here that I can take? Are we good with the entire flow? Are we good here? Yes, no, maybe. Any questions out here? Again, I triggered this release and this release failed. Release 3, I triggered this out today in the morning, manually triggered at around 1st December uh, at around 8:12, and this kind of failed. Can anyone tell me what do you think is the reason behind this? Let's not focus on the entire thing. Let's focus on the error. All these things will, give you a lot more additional information out here. There's something called unhandled promise rejection. This error originates either because of something like that, but this is your actual error. What do you think does this error really tell you? By reading this, can anyone tell me what is the error that you think this is?
The app
Missing
service doesn't.
missing the resource.
Web services stopped.
The app service is stopped. Okay. Anyone else? Anil, you had a point to add. You can go ahead, or someone else as such.
Yeah, some services it is stopped.
It is stopped. Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Service is stopped. Let's see. If a service is stopped, it should be in the stop state, right? Do I have a service at all in the first place? Guys, please understand the error. It's not telling you to stopped. It is telling that the resource doesn't exist. It's the error is clearly telling you the same thing. It's not stopped. It's not telling that this is stopped. It's simply telling that the resource doesn't exist. So, all likely, I would have deleted the resources yesterday. I would have deleted all these things yesterday. Of course, I did delete this, and that's the reason you're getting this particular error. It's very simply telling that, this particular service called a demo app service doesn't really exist out here. And the reason it doesn't exist is because I deleted this out, and that's the reason you cannot go ahead and, let's say, deploy a code on top of it. Now, in order to now go ahead and, let's say, make sure that the release is successful, the very first thing that I need to do is I need to create the app service. So three things that I need to create: the resource group, the app service, and the app service plan. Now imagine that in your architecture there are a lot of things. You have an app service, you have an app service plan, you have a storage account, you have a SQL database that the app service is connecting. A lot of resources out here. In case these are deleted, again we'll have to recreate this manually, and that's the reason I am telling, let's not do a manual creation. Let's not put in a manual creation. Let's approach this via an ARM template. This is something that we know about, and this is something that we have dealt with on ARM templates and etc. Of course, we did not touch how to create an ARM template for a web app, but that shouldn't be a problem at all. All you need to understand is the basics of ARM template, and that's what I'm doing. So today, the goal here is to create my resources using ARM templates, using ARM templates out here, but I don't want to deploy the ARM template via my local machine. I don't want to do that. I want to deploy the ARM template via the Azure DevOps pipeline in an automated approach. If you are following the point too, this is called as infrastructure as a code. Infra as code. In short, we call it as infra as code. Infrastructure as a code. Again, a very important point in your resume and one of the most asked interview questions is that how do you deploy your infrastructure? Do you use something like infrastructure as a code in your architecture? If you're using infrastructure as a code in your architecture, what kind of infrastructure as a code are you using? Are you using Terraform, ARM, PowerShell? How are you implementing this out here as such? So this is how it starts with. Very first thing, I'll create a template. Again, to create a template, I'll open up my VS Code. And again, I don't have any templates today, so I'll just need to start writing it from a scratch. I'll do that. So I'll just say open a new folder. I'll say new folder out here. I'll say infrastructure as a code 8 a.m. something like this. Some random folder out here I'm creating. I'm saying select, and now I'll say Control N, new file. Select language, Azure Resource Manager. So I'm using the Azure Resource Template Manager out here, and I'll say ARM forward slash or ARM exclamation, sorry, not forward slash, exclamation out here. And this is going to load my basic template structure. It's just going to give you the basic template. It's just going to give you the skeleton of the ARM template out here. Now there are two resources that I want to create. I am not concerned about the creation of resource group at all, because resource group is something if I put in my template, right, my template will be a little complicated. So I'm not consider or I'm not rather considering the creation of the resource group at all via the template. I am considering creation of the app service plan and the app service. These are the two things that I'm considering. Now you can tell that, okay, fine, without a resource group, how can you really create this? Now I'm not telling I will not create it completely. I'm not telling that I'm ignoring that resource group. I will create it, of course, but by using a DevOps pipeline is what I'll create this out. So what I'm doing is that I'm doing an app service plan and an app service under it. And to do that, I'll start here. I'll say ARM. Again, it will take some time to load this out. So I'll say ARM exclamation, and instead of doing a storage or a virtual machine or something like that, I'll say ARM hyphen plan, which will give me something known as an app service plan out here. So I'll say ARM hyphen plan. Now it's telling, okay, fine. This is your app service plan. Again, I am not going to hard code all these things. Reason being, I want my templates to be reusable as many times as possible. I want my development teams to use the same template. I want my QA teams to use the same template. I want my DevOps teams to use the same template. I want different environments to be created using the same template out here. So what I am going to do is that introduce parameters. I'll say new parameter. I'll say plan name, something like that. I'll say type is string, and I'm not giving any default value at all. I can give a description telling that this is the, give a description here telling that this is the name of the plan. And in here, I'll remove this and I'll tell this parameters plan name. I'll tell the type here is Microsoft.web/server farms, nothing but the app service plan. App service plans are also called server farms out here. I'll tell the location of this particular resource will be wherever the resource group is there. So wherever the resource group is being created, please go ahead and let's say create me the app service plan out here as such. SKU name capacity, I'll just take this as F1. Capacity number of instances in the background, I'll say this is F1 out here. Tags optional nature, so I'll remove this out. And in the properties, it's again asking you for the app service plan name. I'll say parameters app service plan or plan name out here as such. And this is my plan that I'm creating. It's an app service plan that I'm creating, under which I will now go ahead and create an app service. So I'll say it is ARM hyphen web app. So I said web, and as and when I did that, it's telling web app out here. It's telling what is the name. Again, I'll go ahead and let's say declare the name out here. And it is a new parameter, and I'll say the name here is telling web app name. I'll just scroll down, and instead of this name, I'll say parameters web app name. I'll say the type here is Microsoft.web/sites. I'll say this is a website that I'm creating. The API version is something like this. Location is this. Tags, it's optional. I'll remove this out. And there is something now called as a depends on clause. I'm now telling there's a dependency for this particular app service. I mean, on the web app, because sorry, I'm now telling that before you go ahead and create a web app, there should be a plan that is already existing. And that's where dependency comes into picture, telling that please make sure that you depend upon the resource ID of the app service plan, whose name is not this, but I'll just change this to parameters plan name. And here in the properties, the name of the web app again, I'll change this to say something like parameters web app name. And here the plan name again, I'll change this out to parameters name out here as such. So what I'm doing out here is that I'm creating two different resources. Again, the location of the web is the same, where is the same what I let's say mentioned for the app service plan. And I now have a template. I now really have a template right now, which tells me to create, or which tells Azure to create an app service plan and an app service in the same region. And there is also an interdependency between those resources. And if you it's now telling yes, sites depends upon the creation of app service plan. So first Azure will execute the app service plan and then go ahead and create the website. That's the order of creation. I'll just save, and I'll say this is a JSON. I'll say this is webapp.json. This is the web app that I'm trying to create. I'm saying webapp.json. I got my file right now. Now this is the deal, guys. Whatever changes to this file, I also want to track this out. I also want to have a history of this particular, let's say, approach. So what I am going to do is that now I am going to tell that no DevOps engineer is allowed to go ahead and deploy the code directly, but rather as a DevOps engineer also, as a DevOps engineer, you will have to follow the same procedure what a developer is following. So I want to now store my templates inside the branch of my repository. Inside the branch of the repository is where I want to go ahead and store my templates in. And this is what I am getting to, is how infrastructure as a code really works out here at a ground level. So I'll do that. I'll firstly come here, and very quickly what I'll do is that I'll just disable the continuous integration for a minute. Reason being, as and when I do some change, it will go ahead and trigger off this particular piping. I don't want this to happen. So I'll just disable this for now. Say disable the continuous integration for a short period. We'll re-enable it after our changes are done. And this is our repository wherein it has a code. I'll create one more folder called infrastructure and put my infrastructure in place. So what I'll do is firstly, I'll clone this out in my local machine, because I'm not too sure how older copy that I'm using out here. So I'll just go ahead into that particular junk folder, and I'll say select repository location. And I'm just going ahead and cloning the entire repository into my local machine, and I'll say open in a new window. So it's sitting Android 3, inside which I have all the code. I have the developer branch. And what I'm now going to do is this template that I created, right? I'll just copy that template into the folder where I clone the code. So this is my template, webapp.json. I'll just go back into the Android 3. I'll just say new folder. I'll say this is infra, and I'll just paste this out here as such. So I'm just doing infra. I pasted this template out. As and when I pasted this template, if I now go into my source control manager, It's now telling that yes, there is one change. There is this particular infra that is being committed. I'll say yes, great. And before I make any further changes, what I'm going to do right now is that firstly I'll comment this out. I'll say this is a infra push. I'll say stage all these changes, commit all these changes, and then I'll go ahead and do a sync or a push. So I'm just now trying to, let's say, push all my changes, and it failed. And I'll open the git log out here. And what is a failure here, guys? What should I do out here in order to resolve this particular failure? What should I do? What is the failure, and what should I do to resolve this particular failure out here as such?
Branch has no permissions to pull.
Okay, so what should you do here?
Create a feature branch, I think.
Exactly, create a feature branch. That's what the error message is telling you. You must use a pull request to update this particular branch. Without a pull request, you cannot update this particular branch out here. So let's look at that. I'll just click on this develop. I'll say create a new branch from. I'll say this is a feature, and I'll say this is something like Kiran infra push. And I'll say this is the develop branch from which I want to, let's say, create this out. As in when I do that, I can publish my branch. Very happily, I can publish this out and then create a pull request between that particular branch, my local branch. So here I have branches between this branch and the develop branch. I'm creating a pull request. I'll say create. As when I do that, it's asking for the approval, and very importantly, there's some failure out here. It's telling there is one check that got failed. What exactly is this, guys? What exactly do we think is this particular check? And what do we need to do in order to, let's say, resolve this out?
Branch policies.
Branch policies, yes. So what should I do right now? Yes, it is failing because of a branch policy. In order to, let's say, go over that particular failure, what should I do here?
Work item. Work item must be. We need to link that.
You need to link the work item, which means that you need to create, or there should be a work item that's already created. If it's not, I'll create a new work item. So here there are two work items that is already done. And now say push the infra, assign the work item to my own self. Set this is the infra. I'll say save and close. Now let's go back into our pull request. So I'll say repose pull request out here. I'll say this is the infra push. I've already created this particular pull request, and here what I'll do, I'll just link my work item out here. This is done. And in the files, I'm just going and pushing a new file out here called web.json. I'll say complete the work item after it's deleted. I'll say approve and done. Now the pull request is being merged, and I've also disabled the pipeline trigger. The reason I disabled the pipeline trigger is because I need to make some changes onto my pipeline before I go ahead and, let's say, uh, before I go ahead and do the actual commit out here as such. So I'm now going ahead, completing that particular pull request. And after I complete the pull request, this is how it looks like. So I have a code, I have the infrastructure, and inside the infrastructure, I have all my, let's say, templates out here, which goes ahead and creates two different things. One is an app service plan, two is an Azure web app. This is what it creates, and I want it to create before I go ahead and deploy the code. So what I'm now trying to tell is that this build pipeline that you have, right? It's building the code. Apart from building the code, I'll add one more step out here. And here what I'll say is that I'll say go ahead and do a copy. Say a copy. And there is something called as copy files. Now it is telling, okay, what files do I need to copy? I'll say there is something called ARM templates out here inside this particular folder called infra. And it's telling, okay, fine, in this folder, what should I copy? and here there is a wildcard telling copy everything. Or if you only want to copy everything that starts with webapp.json or everything that ends with .json, I'll say star.json. So please go ahead, do forget about what is the name. If it has an extension called .json, please go ahead and copy it out. And now I'm telling, please copy it to a target folder. And what can be the target folder in this case, guys? If I want to use this template, now this is the question. I want to use these templates with my release pipeline, which means that my release pipeline should have access to these templates out here. If the release pipeline needs access to these templates, what could be the folder that I need to copy this onto? Where can I copy all these things into? Anyone, what do you think? Where can I copy these templates to?
Resource group.
Do I copy the templates into a resource group? Or are we creating a resource group using, let's say, Azure DevOps?
No.
Right. So the question is this: the release pipeline that you have created, it's able to use the code, isn't it? It's able to go ahead and refer to the .zip file. Why is it able to refer to the .zip file? Because it's a part of the drop folder, which is nothing but your artifactory. This is your artifacts. Now, I am now telling that if the release pipeline needs to, let's say, go ahead and use my templates, this templates should also be a part of the artifacts. Should also be a part of, let's say, my artifacts out here as such. So here I only have something called random codes.zip. I also want my templates to be a part of the artifacts. And that's where I'm telling that the target folder, if I click on this, it is telling you can use this particular example called a build.artifact staging directory. This is called a variable declaration in Azure. I'll talk about this in a while because I'll have to again come down to variables to explain what this is. But this variable called build.artifact staging directory is called as a system defined variable, which just tells you that please copy the artifacts to a destination folder called a folder out here, artifact staging directory out here as such. And I'll just say save and queue. Now what this does really is this. It's now added one more step out here, which goes ahead, copies all your JSON files that is there inside the repository into the drop location of your artifacts so that I can start using it inside the release pipeline. That's the intention that I wanted to do. I wanted to use this inside the release pipeline. Now, if you see, you would have a restore, build, test, publish, and after that, you have something called copy files, and then you have something called as publish artifacts out here as such. And very importantly, I place this task called copy files before the publish artifact task so that I can go ahead and publish everything as a part of my pipeline so that my release process can start using this out so that I can go ahead create the infrastructure out here as such. A part of my infrastructure as a code mechanism wherein I am allowing my build pipeline in order to produce the artifact. As of now, it's producing a .zip file. Now I also wanted to produce a .json file. I'm also telling this to go ahead and tell, okay, fine, you know what? Please produce something known as a .json file out here. And that's the reason I changed the way my build pipeline works. I'm allowing it to go ahead and let's say produce this file out here. Again, it'll take like about 2 minutes or so in order for this particular build to complete, and then I can address my release pipeline. But before I go there, any questions still here on what I'm doing? Any confusion still here? Anyone? Any questions or any doubts still here out here as such? Anyone? Anything?
So Kiran, you have
Mm-hmm.
you have created a ARM template and you are using
Mm-hmm.
this to the ARM template. You are
Mm-hmm.
publishing here and JSON
Mm-hmm.
and you are creating that. So normally we will not create the app service and app service plan every time, right? So every time it will
It's not a
copy.
problem. Every time it will copy shouldn't be a problem because the copy will only take about 1 second. And also every time when you try to, let's say, do a release pipeline, it will try to create an app service and app service plan. But if it's already there, it's just an incremental approach. So it's just going to check. So every time it will copy, it can copy, not a problem at all. It will just take about a second or so for the copy to happen. And after the copy happens, this is what I am now talking about. Alongside, let's say, the .zip file, which is a finished code, I also have the raw JSON file out here that I can use. So yes, every time your build pipeline, this will copy. And since the copy takes less than a second, we can ignore this out here as such. Yes. So now I have the template. Now what I'm going to do is that in my release pipeline, before I go ahead with the deployment, I will add one more stage. I'll say add a stage here. And it's asking what kind of a stage you want to add. Here, I want to say ARM, and I have a step called ARM template deployment. It's telling, yes, I want to create an infrastructure using the ARM template that I produced. And I'll say, yes, add them out. And what I'll do is that I'll just pull this task one step ahead. The reason being, this is step one, this is step two. Step one is the creation of infrastructure. Step two is the deployment of the code on top of the infrastructure that I've created. Now, if I scroll down, it's now asking what is a resource manager connection. I'll tell this is the connection. It's asking me what is a subscription. I'll say this is a subscription. It's asking me what is a resource group. As of now, I just have one resource group called demo RG and network RG, but I want to create another resource group called dev RG. Not a part. That's the reason I'm now telling that your DevOps pipeline will first check whether the resource group is there. If it is not, it'll just create the resource group and then update that particular resource group out here as such. So your template doesn't have, or your template really doesn't have the resource group out here, but the pipeline will help you create this particular resource group. If I just scroll down, it's asking for the location. I select location something like ECS2, and now it's telling where is your template. I'll click on this drop down. I'll go here, go into the drop. I'll get my template, which is webapp.json. Something called template parameters. We'll talk about that. But if I just scroll down, there is no parameter that I passed in my template. As of now, my template is a vanilla flavor. There is no name of the app service plan. There is no name of the app service as such. There is nothing as such out there. So what I'll do is I'll just click on these three dots. And now it's telling what is the plan name. Saying this is the name of the plan because that's the description that I've given. So what I'll do is I'll just give my plan name here. The plan 01. Reason being, I can now reuse my template out here as such. So what I'm doing is I'm passing the names. So I'm passing all those names, which is app service plan name and the app service name out here. Using Azure DevOps, I am going ahead and passing this as an override. I'll now see here it is a dev web app abcxyz 000 or abcxyz DevOps, something like this. I'll say okay. So what I'm doing is that I'm mentioning what is the file, and as and when I mention what is the file, there is a section called override template parameters. We'll talk about what template parameters really are and all those things out here. There's a section called override template parameters, and in this, I went ahead, clicked on this, and here I have the plan name and the web app name that we have declared as a part of my template parameters. Now it's saying yes, these are template parameters. Can you give me what are those values? I gave this values, and I'll just copy this out. I'll say okay, and this is how I'm creating my infrastructure. So I'll say creating infrastructure. After that, I have a deployment. Now it's telling which web app you want to deploy. I'll remove the name. I'll go ahead and give the name of the web app that I'm creating as a part of my first step. I'm just giving the name out here. The zip folder remains the same. I'm good with that. I'll now say save. I'll say added ARM template deployment step. and I'll say okay. I'll say create a release and create a release out here as such. Now release 5 has been created. Now let's see. There are two steps in this release pipeline. First is to create the infrastructure. Second is to deploy the code onto the created infrastructure out here. And these two together are now forming the are now forming the base component of something known as infrastructure as a code out here as such. So I'm now going ahead and doing the deployment. It's doing the same, initializing the job, downloading the artifact. So it'll just go and download the artifact from that particular build pipeline section. And once the artifact is available, it will try to create your infrastructure. So for example, if you see this, I do not have a resource group called DevRG. That's something that I don't have. And that's what your release pipeline will try to do. So it'll take some time here. It'll take about 19 seconds to acquire the agent. And now it's going in and downloading all the artifacts out here. And once it downloads, the next step is to go ahead and let's say create the infrastructure out here. So let's wait for a minute for the infrastructure to come in, and let's understand how this happens out here as such. So let's refresh the screen. Now it's creating the infrastructure, and very importantly, it's telling, okay, fine, does the resource group exist? Does this particular resource group really exist? It's telling yes, then no, it doesn't exist, false. So it's telling I'm creating the resource group. So now if you refresh this out, I now have a resource group that got created by via my DevOps pipeline. And inside this particular resource group, if you go inside the deployment section, Azure DevOps is trying to make a deployment out here. So it's trying to, let's say, create the app service plan with the name that you have passed. And it will also try to create the app service. And it did create these two resources out here. And if I now go into my releases, okay, into my releases out here, the creation of infrastructure is done. Took about 54 seconds. And now it's going ahead, trying to get the app service name and trying to deploy the code onto the app service that you have just created. So it created the infrastructure, and on top of the infrastructure it created, it's now trying to deploy the code initiate. It's trying to initiate the code deployment, and it's telling yes, successfully deployed the package. And it'll take like a minute to complete the deployment out here. It'll restart the app service inside internally, and once it restarts, you should be able to see all your random codes that are getting generated. This entire process or this entire workflow right now is called as an infrastructure as a code out here as such. The ARM template create web app in the Azure portal. Yes, where exactly it would create the let's say web app in the Azure portal only. Yes, it would create the web app in the Azure portal. Yes. Is any questions still here? Anyone? Any questions still here that I can take?
You give manually the parameters. If you want to
Mm-hmm.
enable that release as well, automate that one to automate that.
When you say automating the parameters, what do you mean exactly by that? Can you please elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, in the parameters override parameters option we have
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
given. So for that reason, you want to show that only we have disabled the releases, right? Now, if
We
like
have. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, please. Mm-hmm.
if you want to automate this entire release, like without manual intervention, like how we will provide our here, we cannot automate.
It's already automated. Now, the first time I'm going ahead and giving all these things out. Second time, what I'll do is I'll simply go ahead, say, okay, fine, I'll enable continuous integration on my build pipeline because even this is automated right now. So triggers, I'll say enable continuous integration. I'll say save. And very firstly, if you check this out, it created the dev.rg, it created the web app out here. And if I look at the web app, if I browse this particular web app, it's going to tell that this is a devops.azurewebsites.net, and I have version 1 of my code that is getting run. And if I refresh every time, there will be a random code that's getting generated out here as such. Now let's see. What I'll do is that I'll just go into my repository as a developer. Very firstly, I'll create a work item for myself. And sorry, I'll create a work item for myself on my board telling update the code to version 2. And this is something that is assigned to myself. So I'll just go ahead and assign this out here. And after that, I'll just go ahead and let's say update my code. So I'm going inside the code. So I'll create a new feature branch. I'll say feature version 2. Say create. And inside that, I'll just go into the code. I'll just go into app setting files of this particular code. And I'll just edit this out, telling that this is version 2. I'll commit, create a pull request into the developer branch. I'll say create. I'll set this to complete, delete the work items. I'll say approve this out. And once I approve this out, it's now merging the pull request. And this is now going to go ahead trigger your build pipeline. By now, it should have triggered a build pipeline right now. Triggered a build pipeline. This pipeline will give you the artifact, and automatically it will trigger a release pipeline. I am not again going ahead and changing the name. I want to deploy the same code onto the same app service in different stages, of course, yes. But yes, the name or declaring the names is a manual procedure for the very first time. You declare the name. From the second time around, it's going to get automated. It's automatically automated right now. If you check this out, my build pipeline, it's going ahead and producing my artifacts. So it'll take some time, like what 2 minutes or so, in order to go ahead, restore, do a build and all that stuff, and also copy the artifacts. And once this is done, it will now start going ahead and triggering the release out, because release is working in a continuous deployment mode right now. I did not change that. It'll trigger the release out, and once the release goes in, it'll go ahead and start trying to create or trying to check for the infrastructure, and after that it'll deploy the new code out here. And in a minute or so, you should be able to see that this is version 2 and not version 1. This is how now my entire workflow is now following. So same workflow, but I've now introduced one more concept out here, or one small thing out here, telling that okay, fine, I want to go ahead and let's say create my infrastructure as well out here as such. So yes, the very first time I went ahead and let's say gave all my inputs manually, but from the second time around, there is no manual input. It's all automated out here as such for me. Does it answer your question? And was this your question?
What will happen, Kiran? We have given the override
Um,
parameters option we have given there, right? What will happen? It will, as it is already created by last time, what will happen? It will not touch again the parameters.
it will do an incremental approach. It'll
Yeah,
just no,
yeah,
it's not about parameters. It's about the state of the resources in your Azure portal. Since ARM is incremental in nature, we'll just go and check whether the resources are there, whether all the configuration matches with the template. If it's yes, doesn't do anything, move forward and deploys the code out here as such. And that's what will happen. So let's check this out. It'll take like about 10 more seconds out here to go ahead and let's say do the test and publish all these things out. So test is done, and after that, the publish is done. It'll take like a minute or so to publish this out. Copy the artifacts a second again, and then the publish artifact step comes into picture, and this is done. And it has produced the artifact already. And I have a .zip and a .json. This is all done. It would have already triggered a release. It did trigger a release right now. Continuous deployment out here. I'm not touching my parameters at all. I'm just leaving the way they are. That's it. I'm just leaving the way they are. It's just trying to check whether this particular app service plan is existing. So it's now going ahead trying to initialize the job. And once it's done, it'll download the artifact. And once it downloads the artifact, your Azure portal right now or your DevOps portal right now will ask a couple of questions. It'll try to, let's say, create the infrastructure. And now this is the question it's asking. Does the resource group exist? Yes, it exists. So now it's telling, okay, fine. It's telling creating a deployment parameter and try to create a deployment out here. So if you go inside the resource group and say deployments, now I have a new deployment. All it's doing is that it's just checking whether that particular app service plan exists. Is it existing? Yes. Is the web app existing? Yes, existing. So your ARM template will not even touch this out. It will take less than a minute out here to check your infrastructure. It will take less than a minute. And once it checks out, it will move ahead and it will try to, let's say, do the deployment out here as such. So yes, this is how the workflow is now going around.
So if it is not present, it will create. If it is present,
If it is
create.
present, if it's present, it'll just go ahead and verify it out. If there are any changes to your infrastructure, it'll update it out.
No rename. Can't we rename app service or service plan? Can't we rename?
If you do rename it, it's just going to go ahead and create a new one then. ARM templates are going to work in that way, right? So if it if you just go ahead and change the name out here,
Automatically it will
you just go
create.
ahead and update the name out here, you still create a new one. Say plan 2, it'll create a plan 2, and under that it'll go ahead and create a new about here for you as such. Yes. Any questions here?
So monitoring of this CI/CD entire deployments is here only. Kiran?
Yes. It's
Monitoring
here
of
only. Correct. It's here. You
the
can
way how
monitor all these things.
we have to monitor.
I'm sorry, can you come in, please? Do we?
The way how you are showing, the same way we will monitor the deployments in real time. How it is
Yes.
being. Okay.
Yes. Yes. Any more questions, guys?
Once we have created the ARM templates, that ARM template is used to up to end of the project, right, sir?
It's not like that. Once we create the ARM template, it's not the same ARM template we use up to the end of the project. There can be updates to your ARM templates. There will be updates to your ARM templates. For example, let's say you don't want the plan to be F1, you want the plan to be S1. So you can, as a DevOps engineer, go ahead and update the plan on, I mean, update the template out here. But yes, the base of the template will be the same. On top of that, we go ahead and make multiple updates out here in order to go ahead and, let's say, update our infrastructure. Or sometimes if you want to destroy and recreate the infrastructure, yes, could be possible for some test case scenarios and all these things out here as such.
So this you did in one environment. The
Hmm.
same can be migrated in upper environments.
Of
Suppose
course,
for
yes.
example in Dev.
Hmm. Of course, yes. And that's the reason I have my template to be generic in nature. I am not passing or I'm not hard coding my template out here. I'm making sure my template is as generic as possible so that I can use the same template and just clone the same process that I'm doing here and promote my code to a higher environment like QA or like production or like staging and so on and so forth out here. Yes, that's something that we're going to do. We are going to do multi-stage release pipelines. That's something that we are going into. That's something that I will cover. But yes, to answer to your question, we can do that. We can replicate it out.
Okay, Kiran, thank
Is there any more questions, guys?
you. Kiran, why we have variables
Mhm.
here top?
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about
Oh,
what really variables are. We'll talk about those. And variables are one of the most important part of Azure DevOps. We'll talk about those things out here as such. Again, guys, one quick heads up here is that, see, when I start the class, I see there are about 32, 33 people out here. A lot of people who are dropping in between the session. Again, my message to everyone who's dropping in between the session is that if you're not understanding, please ask questions and get it verified, or connect with me and get it verified, get it clarified. If you're dropping the session and if you're listening to the session offline, you won't be able to take much benefit of this particular session. You won't be able to follow, and if you have questions, you won't be able to ask the questions out here real time. So please make sure that you're not dropping the session out. if you're not understanding anything, please make sure to ask the same question so that I can go ahead and help you out. Again, if you're asking questions like, you know what, I did not understand the last two sessions, can you please go ahead and again retell me the last two sessions? No, that's something that I cannot do out here. You will need to have specific questions that I can address out here as such. Only then you'll be able to, let's say, really take the benefit of this particular course. So please make sure to do that. Please make sure to attend each and every session out here. This is Azure DevOps that we are really looking at. It's a different product. It's a different terminology that we are really talking about. So if there's anything that you have a question with, please let me know. I'll be more than happy to explain that. Any more questions, guys, before I close here? So what I want you to try is just one simple approach of ARM templates, the same thing what I did here. Create the infrastructure, deploy this out, and let me know if you have any questions there.
I have a question, Kiran. Are we
Good, please.
done with the ARM templates lecture?
Not completely. There are multiple ARM examples that I'm talking about, and also I will start giving some assignments out here because I was just waiting for DevOps to start and the infrastructure as a code to start right now. So ARM templates, the concept, the underlying concept is done, meaning how to create the template, how to pass the parameters, how to do all those things, that's done. But the practice still remains. Now, that's a never-ending process. There are a lot of examples that we need to really look at. So we'll kind of look at those things out here as such.
Thank you, Kiran.
No
Kindly
worries.
give us the assignments.
Definitely, I will give you the assignments and I expect you all to try out the assignments before I give the solutions out here. The reason that I'm telling is because the ARM template is more about giving or more about, let's say, going ahead and practicing out rather than doing a lecture on top of that. Because see, the underlying basic is the same, but how do you develop your logic? That's important. So we'll do the assignments because now we started with infrastructure as a code. We'll do multiple assignments on top of ARM templates out here as such.
Yeah, that will help us in interviews to answer the interview.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, guys, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.